All right, so ready to dig into something really interesting. We're diving into the future of Europe's economy. Like, how can they stay competitive in this crazy, fast changing world? We've got this in depth report. It's called The Future of European Competitiveness. And let me tell you, it gets into everything: energy, tech, skills, even how countries are governed. But the best part, it's not just some boring analysis, it's got all these eye opening insights. Really makes you think.
It's true. This report is amazing in how it connects all those different areas. It
Yeah.
really makes you realize that Europe's success depends on all these things working together.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The report starts by looking at where the EU stands globally. And honestly, some of the findings were a little shocking. Like, did you know that the top 5 US tech companies combined, the big ones, are worth more than the entire EU telecom sector? That's a pretty wild comparison, right?
Absolutely. It really highlights the intense competition European companies are up against, especially in those key tech areas. And the report doesn't shy away from the challenges, things like higher production costs in Europe. But, and this is important, it also points out the EU's strengths, like their highly skilled workforce, their focus on sustainability, which is becoming more and more important, and of course that huge internal market they have.
You mentioned sustainability, and that really caught my eye too. The report actually sees clean technologies as a big opportunity for the EU. They have a real chance to be a leader in things like electric vehicles and offshore wind power. But, and I feel like there's always a but, the report says almost 100% of the lithium used in the EU is imported. If they're serious about those EVs and batteries, relying on other countries for that seems risky, don't you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a vulnerability. It's what we call resource dependency, and it's something the report really digs into. Basically, it means a region's economy is vulnerable if they depend too much on other countries for essential stuff. Think about it. If some key material for those wind turbines suddenly became really scarce or the price skyrocketed, it could completely derail the EU's plans. The report actually compares it to Japan. They had similar challenges and decided to create an agency, Jodremec, just to focus on securing access to those crucial raw materials. It makes you wonder if the EU needs to do something similar, be more strategic to make sure they have a steady supply of what their industries need. I mean, they can't become a leader in clean technology if they don't have the materials to actually build anything.
Right. It's like trying to bake a cake, but you have to import all the ingredients. At some point, you got to ask, can we even bake this cake?
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another crucial ingredient, so to speak, that this report digs into: energy. They really get into the nitty-gritty of the EU's natural gas and electricity markets.
Yeah, so what they find out? Anything surprising?
Oh, definitely. For example, get this. Natural gas only makes up about 20% of the EU's electricity mix.
Okay, so not the majority, but still a good chunk.
Right. But here's the kicker. It was the main driver of electricity prices a whopping 63% of the time in 2022.
Wow, seriously. That seems kind of disproportionate. Oh.
It does, doesn't it? And it goes to show you how vulnerable the EU is when it comes to energy. You see, even though natural gas isn't their main source of electricity, that reliance on it, even for a smaller portion, leaves them wide open to price swings in the global market.
And as we saw last year, those prices can really spike.
Exactly. The report makes a strong case for the EU to diversify, find more sources of energy so they're not so reliant on just one. It's about building a more resilient system.
So it's not just about being less reliant on one particular fuel source. It's about protecting themselves from those global shockwaves that can really mess things up.
Right, exactly. And that idea of resilience, of being able to weather those storms, that actually connects to another big theme in the report: innovation.
Okay, yeah, innovation, everyone's talking about it these days. But what does that actually mean for the EU?
Well, in a nutshell, the report argues that the EU needs to step up its game, especially with the US and China pouring tons of resources into research and development. Right now, the EU is lagging behind.
So how do they catch up? Any ideas in the report?
They do. One really interesting suggestion is for the EU to use its public procurement power more strategically.
Now, when you say public procurement, you're talking about.
Basically, governments spend a ton of money buying things, right?
Mm.
Everything from office supplies to infrastructure. The report argues that the EU could leverage that buying power, use it to stimulate innovation by intentionally buying from companies developing cutting-edge technologies.
Ah, I see. So it's like giving those innovative companies a boost, creating a market for their products.
Precisely. And it's not just about the money, it's about sending a signal to the market, showing that the EU is serious about supporting these new technologies.
That makes sense. Create the demand and the innovation will follow.
Exactly. And alongside innovation, the report dives into another crucial piece of the puzzle: skills, or more specifically, the need to close the skills gap. They found some really interesting, if a bit concerning, things about the state of STEM education in the EU.
Oh, like what?
Well, one statistic that really stood out to me was that there are nearly 4 times as many men as women working in EU information and communication technology jobs.
Wow, 4 times? That's a huge gap.
It is. And it's not just an equality issue, though it's definitely that too. It's also an economic issue. If the EU is serious about competing in the global tech sector, they can't afford to ignore the talents of half their population.
It's true. We can't just talk about equality and then not actually have it, right? Seems like a
But
no-brainer.
exactly. And this all ties back to the EU's overall competitiveness.
Yeah.
They need everyone contributing if they want to be a major player on the global stage.
Okay, so we've talked about securing those essential resources, making their energy systems more resilient, and then really going all in on innovation and skills development. I mean, that's a pretty hefty to-do list.
It is, no doubt about it. But the report does offer some hope, I'd say. It lays out some concrete steps the EU can take, starting with rethinking how they use their existing resources, especially when it comes to the EU budget.
So are you saying they don't necessarily need a whole bunch of new money? It's more about using what they already have more effectively.
Exactly. They need to focus on the big-ticket items, the game changers, like clean technology.
Okay, so prioritize, pick their battles, and really put their money where their mouth is. But how do they actually do that? It's not like they can just snap their fingers and suddenly the entire EU budget is laser focused on like 5 things.
True, it's definitely not a quick fix. But the report has some intriguing ideas. For one, they suggest being smarter about leveraging their financial power, like making better use of programs like InvestEU.
Invest EU, remind me what that is again.
Basically, it's a way for the EU to use public funds to attract private investment. So it's not just about spending their own money, it's about using it to encourage private companies to get involved too.
Oh, and they also talk about setting up a dedicated equity arm within the European Investment Bank.
The EIB, right. For those of us who aren't finance wizards, what exactly does the European Investment Bank do? Good point. Not everyone speaks fluent acronym. So the EIB is like the lending arm of the European Union. They provide financing for projects that support EU goals.
Okay, makes sense.
So creating an equity arm within the EIB would mean they could actually take ownership stakes in companies, not just give out loans. It's a way to be more directly involved in growing those strategic sectors.
So they'd be more like a venture capitalist, investing in companies rather than just lending them money.
Exactly. It's about being bolder, more entrepreneurial with their investments. But, it's not just about money. The report also has some pretty strong opinions about EU bureaucracy.
Yeah, I was going to say that's another thing that stuck out to me. It wasn't exactly a glowing review of their regulatory processes.
Not at all. They argue that all the red tape and administrative hurdles are really holding businesses back, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, the SMEs.
Which are so important for any economy. Those are the innovators, the risk takers.
Exactly. And they highlight this practice called gold plating, where individual countries add their own extra rules on top of the existing EU laws.
Oh, I've heard of that. It's like adding extra layers of bureaucracy on top of what's already there.
Right. And all those extra layers really bog things down. Makes it harder to do business, harder to innovate, harder to compete.
So basically, they're saying that simplifying these processes, making it easier to operate in the EU, would actually make them more competitive globally.
Exactly. A more business-friendly environment would unleash the potential of their entrepreneurs. That's what they argue, at least.
It makes sense. You can't be bogged down in bureaucracy and expect to compete with the rest of the world.
Absolutely. It's about fostering a culture of innovation, making sure the system is supporting businesses, not holding them back.
It's been fascinating to really delve into this report with you. We've covered a lot, everything from critical raw materials to the EU budget, even bureaucratic bottlenecks. It's clear the EU is facing some serious challenges, but this report doesn't just highlight the problems, it offers solutions. There are definitely paths forward, but it's going to take bold action and a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking. So what do you think, listeners? What are the biggest hurdles facing the EU, and what opportunities do you see for them to really shape their economic future? We'd love to hear your thoughts.